Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Fans. I'm your host, Wayne, and in this episode, I'm going to be talking to you about villains, misunderstood villains, and I'll also be throwing in some movie trivia as always. So, one thing that I think we can all agree on is if you're going to have an interesting good versus evil kind of film, TV show, or anything like that, you need a really good villain. Darth Vader is one of those great villains. Um, he says Sauron, you know. So you really do need a villain. Kingpin in the original Netflix series for Daredevil, brilliant villain. But was he a good guy? Just misunderstood. So, as I say, let's go through some of the iconic villains and then discuss whether or not they were truly villains or whether they were just trying to do the right thing for their city, for their community, but they were perhaps a little bit misunderstood. So, where shall we begin? Is a good question. I think Alien could be one of those villains that potentially wasn't a villain. It was just a xenomorph wanted to breed, procreate the population. Um, and it was just misunderstood because that's essentially all it was trying to do. Now we have another film in 2007, Gone Baby Gone. Jack Doyle. Now, could Jack Doyle be one of those villains that was misunderstood? He plays a police captain. Morgan Freeman plays the police captain who orchestrates the kidnapping of a little girl from her problematic family. So I think straight away there we can see that, okay, this cop has obviously done the wrong thing, but has he done it with the best of intentions? And that is part and parcel of having, I feel, a great villain is they have the best intentions, just like Kingpin does in Daredevil. He wants to see the his city rise up and be a utopia, but in his eyes, he has to destroy it and he has to rebuild it from scratch, which is what makes him the villain because he wants to try and destroy Hell's Kitchen. Now, going back to Gone Baby Gone, the girl eventually returns home, and it's quite sad because she is then neglected by her mother again. So, this can be quite a diversive kind of film for the very reason. I think it can highlight the failings of society when you have to do something like that. But Captain Doyle is portrayed as the villain in this particular film, and you've got to question: is he though? Could he have actually been the hero of the film? We can move on to The Wizard of Oz from 1939 and The Wicked Witch, which obviously Dorothy has to overcome. The Wicked Witch of the West, which was played by Margaret Hamilton, she does seem quite terrifying. She seems quite a horrendous person to know. And incidentally, there is a West End musical called Wicked, where they kind of delve into the history of the witch from the West, and I think it's also her sister, the witch from the East. Um, I haven't seen the West End show myself, but it has got good reviews. So if you've seen it, then leave a review down here and tell me what you think. But there's one thing that we can't really forget, and that is that Dorothy has killed her sister, and that happens quite early on in the film. So, is the Wicked Witch really the villain here when she's possibly acting out of emotion and wants revenge? Because at the end of the day, her sister's being killed for no real reason. Um, Not only that, but she had some magical slippers, which Dorothy then goes along and pinches. So not only did she kill her sister, she actually stole from her dead corpse. Again, you could raise some morality questions there as to who is actually the villain and who's done the right or wrong thing. So let's move on to potentially another villain. And in 1985, we were treated to The Breakfast Club, which had an outstanding cast, and it's a really cool film. I haven't seen it for ages, but it's just one of I think it's a coming of age film. It's very typical of the 80s, and if you're a child of the 80s, you'll appreciate it. And if you're not a child of the 80s, you'll still appreciate it because it does kind of show you what life growing up in the 80s under the threat of nuclear attack, I might add. That threat didn't go away until the 90s. So, in the midst of the Cold War, I think we were treated to some really good films. But the villain in The Breakfast Club is portrayed as the assistant principal Vernon. Now is he the villain again? So he's an authoritarian assistant. So he likes things done in a particular way, in specific fashion. And these kids have ended up in detention. Now, he might have seemed a bit overbearing and quite harsh to the viewers on how he treats the students, but he was also spending his Saturday in school to oversee this detention. So that would actually quite annoy me if I had to go into work because somebody was clowning around during the week and then I was asked to go in to sort them out on a weekend. I'd be pretty cross as well with that. And essentially, he only wants what's best for the students, as many children, many teachers do. That's what they want for their students. So, and this crowd of kids were quite rowdy, so he's going to have to go in there and be quite tough. It's one of those cases where I think he's good, he's bad to be good, or good to be bad. It's good to be bad. Just to try and install some discipline into the children that are under his supervision. One of the other villains, and she's been portrayed in recent times as not necessarily a villain, but somebody with heart and on the good side who sees the only way forward is to turn to the dark side, and that is Mystique from X-Men. I'm going by how she's being portrayed in the live action because history, character, lore can change immensely from one writer to another when it comes to the comic books. They have that common lore in tow, but then you've only got to look at modern day politics, how they decide to change things. And I think the X-Men in particular, with the X-Men 97 show on Disney Plus, is one of those cases where they've changed and altered some of the previous history, particularly with Magneto and Rogue. If you haven't seen X-Men 97, I probably will be giving you some spoilers on that because I've just finished watching the complete series. So while I'm talking about X-Men, what do I think of the Disney Plus show? I think it's okay. I think it's got some very good points to it. It kind of feels, for me, and you might watch it and think I'm talking a load of rubbish here, but for me, it feels like a proper extension to the original animation series. There are one or two, and I will caveat that, there are one or two things which are a bit I'm not sure of, and one of those is the romance, and this is going to be a spoiler, so spoilers ahead. If you haven't seen X-Men 97 and you don't want to hear any spoilers, then I suggest you switch away now and come back in 5 minutes. Yeah, X-Men 97, the romance between Magneto and Rogue, as far as I'm aware, was never in the comics, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, mainly because of the age difference. Magneto is somebody who survived the Second World War as a child, so he would be a lot older than Rogue. So a little bit off with that one. It kind of creates a love triangle between her and Gambit, which we've never seen before in any of the previous and interpretations on the animation. So we haven't seen that in any episodes. And yeah, it was a little bit out of place and out of character, really. They did try and justify this relationship by having Rogue being able to touch Magneto because he has some sort of electromagnetic field on his skin, which means she can feel him, he can feel her. And that is something that she needs, as I think anybody in a relationship needs. You need to have physical contact. So that was a little bit, yeah, I'm not sure. Not sure about that. But I mean, you might have watched it and you might think that it was quite enjoyable, or you might be dead set against it. So that's an interesting fit. They also weren't afraid to kill off characters. So it was kind of had a vibe of Game of Thrones, where you wouldn't be sure which character was going to survive and which one was going to get killed off. Incidentally, they do kill, like Gambit does get killed in this, and that again, it's something that we haven't seen in the animated series before, not to the extent that it was in the X-Men 97 on Disney Plus. But in a way, I did kind of like it because it was different and it was very much like, oh, what is going to happen? It kept me interested because you weren't too sure who was going to survive and who wasn't. The villain at the end and everything else, which gets defeated. Yep, okay. So they bring the Sentinels back and they have the new creator of the Sentinels. Yep, no, it felt good. It was enjoyable. The fight scenes and that at the end were just as good as what they were for me, at least, way back in the 90s. But overall, I think it's too little too late, because we've been so used to Disney wokeness and nonsense that I don't think people would give X-Men 97 the chance that I feel it deserves. So if you haven't watched it, then I would say go and watch it. If you're an X-Men fan, I think you'll enjoy it. The skepticism that I had with it being Disney was a little bit unfounded. I think the internet kind of blows up these things, sometimes rightly so, and on other times it's disproportionately. And I think X-Men 97 has been blown up disproportionately. Okay, they've made Morph non-binary, but it doesn't make, it's not a big deal in the show. And I think that's fair. I think you can add these things into your media, but the story shouldn't focus around that, and it didn't. There is a scene where I thought they'd actually killed off Wolverine, because then that's another rumor that was going around about the relationship that Wolverine was going to have with Morph. It never materialized, and I'm quite pleased about that. That is one of the few things that I think would have stopped me from watching this, is if they'd have made a real major difference to the sexuality of Wolverine, because he's never been portrayed like that. Not that I've got a problem with anybody, you have whatever sexuality, you do whatever makes you happy, as long as it's consensual and legal. I really don't care what you do. So going back to Mystique, then could she be a villain that is just misunderstood and has good intentions? I think so. She's been portrayed by Jennifer Lawrence, and in a way, when she was portrayed by Jennifer Lawrence, this was for the X-Men, the reboot X-Men, wasn't it? The younger ones, First Class and all that. She's on the good side of good in those, but then in the original trilogy, she's with Magneto, and then in the cartoon animated series, she's also a bit of a villain. But it's nice to see the change with X-Men First Class, how she was quite a young girl. She found Professor X breaking into his house, I think it was, and they form a friendship. So she is a bit of a tormented soul. So she's gone through all of this trauma, and Mystique has to use her abilities to hide herself, hide who she really is, until she meets Giles. and then they become friends, so she can let that side of her be a bit more public knowledge. So yeah, I think Mystique is another one of those people who's been portrayed as a villain who essentially could be just a little bit misunderstood, and somebody who has a good heart, just doesn't know how to go about changing the world in a positive way. But they do want to change the world for a positive. Raiders of the Lost Ark, would there be a villain amongst that film that we feel could be just misunderstood? And I think Dr. Rene Belloc could be. I think the character himself, he's working with the Germans from the 1940s, so there's certain issues that he has with that. But was he doing it with the best of intentions, but within the wrong crowd? And I'll leave that up to you to decide. Leave a comment in the box below and tell me what you think. Um, so, yeah, I mean, on to some movie trivia now. And what I've been working on is the Karate Kid. That's a series of YouTube videos that are coming out very soon, and Die Hard. So I've also been doing the original Sinbad films from the 1960s because I quite like that animation, and I will be creating my own animations very soon once I've finished writing the second book to the series that I've done. If you're unfamiliar with my science fiction books, they're available on the Amazon bookstore. My author name is W.A. Blinko. So there is a link in my bio. So if you go onto the link down below, then you'll be able to find my books on Amazon. I will be going with other publishers in the near future, but I've really been concentrating on the second book. So the first one came out a few years ago, so I really need the sequel done. It's going to be the next J.R.R. Martin, where I'm playing games instead of writing. So anyway, the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which was released in 1958, and this was one of my favourite films as a child. A lot of these kind of stop motion films I really enjoyed. So did you realise that the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad was the first feature film to use stop motion animation effects that was filmed entirely in colour? So up until that point, stop motion animation had been used, but it had been used mainly in black and white films. So 1958, they made their very first colour film. Ray Harryhausen, he gave the Cyclopses in the film. There's two Cyclopses, and what he did was so that you could distinguish the two from one another, so you didn't think it was the same Cyclops, was he gave the second one a corneal horn on his head. So the first one is you see on the beach. And moving on to what we got, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. Yeah, again, this was made in 1977, so all these films were made before or around the time that I was born. I'm just showing my age a little bit. And they were put on TV quite a lot, and it's just really entertaining. So if you've got your favourite film from the 1980s, or what was your favourite film growing up? For me, it was the Sinbad films, and the genies. I had a bit of an obsession with genies. I just wanted my 5 wishes, or 3 wishes. Doesn't matter. And I think even now, if I could see a genie, I'd still would like a wish at least. So the Golden Voyage of Sinbad was released in 1973, and it starred Robert Shaw. He was the producer. He was fired. I'll get this right now. He was a friend with the producer, Charles H. Schemmer, who persuaded him to actually go and play the Oracle of All Knowledge in the film. So Shaw only agreed this as a favour, but requested not to be credited in that role, as he felt that this genre of films was beneath him. As of the so Christopher Lee also, he was also in Doctor Who. He wasn't, was it? It was the other one, Peter Cushing, that was in Doctor Who. So Christopher Lee was the front runner for the role of Korora in the film. And we've got a little bit more. So Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. If you want to know more info about these films, then I have put them up on YouTube. There's a series that I've done. So for Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, which was released in 1977, so we get a little bit more up to date here. Lawrence Naismith was the first choice for the role of Melanthus, but this was but he was unavailable. That's what it was. So he was unavailable for this film because of circumstances. I think he was tied up making something else, and the Tragletov was originally going to be in I've lost me train of thought here. Right. Well, moving on, as I say. So, Sinbad of the Seven Seas in 1989. This film was, well, it was a little bit of a disaster. They ploughed so much money into making this film, and the original director spent millions of pounds and come up with about 3 hours of usable footage, or at least he thought it was usable footage, only for it to be totally unusable and incoherent. So they rehired the original director, who he wrote the script, and it was Luci Cosi was directing. And the film itself was originally going to be a 3D project way back in 1983, but it took them so long to get around to filming this, they didn't actually make it until 1989. He still wanted to make it a 3D movie, but obviously the technology then wasn't as good as what it is now, so they just stuck with a 2D version. Now, Luigi Cosi was originally going to direct this film in 1986, but the producers replaced him with Enzo G. Costolero at the last minute. So they done that change at the last minute, and Costolero went on, as I said, to film 3 hours worth of footage that was totally incoherent, and they couldn't make a film. When they screen tested the film, the audience reaction was so terrible, so bad, that they decided to release it straight onto DVD rental for the home video market, which in the 1980s, early 90s was quite big business. Then we had something called Blockbusters, which was a great shop. You'd hire your film out for 5 nights, I think it was, and take it back. So those were the days. And then, of course, got Netflix, where you just pay £7 or £8 upwards, and you can watch as many films and TV shows as you wish. So that's it for this week's catch up movie chat. Come back next week, where I'll be talking more movies, and we'll see what happens in the week of pop culture between now and then. One story that actually has been, it's caught my attention for a while, and that is what Warhammer 40,000 have done. And maybe I'll go into that in more detail next week, because I'm going to do a bit of research on this one. I'm a big Warhammer 40,000 fan. I love playing it. I play as Chaos Space Marines, so Blood for the Blood God, and you'll know who that is. And the Elder. I've got an Elder army, but I am mainly Chaos Space Marines. Love them. So yeah, well, Games Workshop have decided to change some of the history. We've got Henry Cavill, who's doing the Amazon TV show adaptation of the 40k universe, What implications is that going to have for 40k? I don't know, but I'll go into more detail in that next week. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to this episode of Sci-Fi Fans. If you've enjoyed yourself here, and if you've enjoyed me talking to you, please check out my books on the Amazon bookstore. If you've got the Amazon Kindle Unlimited program, then you can download both of my stories for free and just read a couple of pages and let me know what you think. You can find me at wayneblinko.com, wayneblinko.com, for all of my social media links. I have got a TikTok account as well. And yeah, leave a comment where you can, and I will be back next week. Don't forget you can join me on YouTube for regular trivia videos, and I'm going to be doing another little project as well, which I'm going to keep quiet about at the moment, but I'm quite excited about it. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, and I'll be back next week for another live chat.